Good morning, and thank you everybody for tuning in for our Guru panel. This is our fifth Guru panel, something like that. We've had a lot of people tune in for those, so we're really grateful for everybody who is here to ask questions and to learn from our panelists. So today we're talking about acceleration. And so we have Saxon Amdahl, who is the architect, and he is going to be talking to us about acceleration as well as the rest of the panel. Shawn Hurley, who is a principal software engineer. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen because I forgot. So sorry about that. But anyway, and then Dawn Parzych, who's the product manager as well. So tell me, you guys, a little bit about where we are from an acceleration standpoint. Where does F5 play in that space, and what are the things in the industry that are going on that are, making it a popular topic for people who want to talk about, and what are the challenges that they're facing?
From a web perspective, we have a whole host of issues that customers are trying to fix when you're looking at trying to deliver heavy web pages to users all over the world, high latency links, mobile devices, satellite connections. Consumers have gotten to the point where they want more and more content on a page. They want video, they want chat pods, they want all the latest and greatest technology. That's caused web pages to grow in size pretty significantly over the last few years.
Yeah, we see that on Dev Central too. We've got a ton of different types of content, and a lot of it, some of it streaming, definitely dynamic content, so it does present some challenges.
Oh, definitely. And so we look to provide solutions to reduce the amount of requests that are being sent in, reduce the size of the responses that are being sent out, and hopefully even eliminate users from requesting repeat content.
Absolutely. That makes sense. So what are you guys seeing in the industry, or what are you seeing coming from customers of what's important to them?
Well, for most applications that people are looking at accelerating, of course, at the end of the day, the thing that they're really looking for is better response time for that application, better performance. Now, what that looks like really, of course, depends on the application. A lot of the applications Dawn was just speaking to are web-based applications, and so what they're really looking at is from the time the user clicks on a link or hits return after typing in the URL, how long does it take for that page to display on their screen, at least the upper half, the visible portion, and be fully rendered and usable? If you look at other applications, like replication applications, people are looking to meet their RPO and their RTO objectives, and so that's a different kind of performance, but again, another common concern that our customers have. And in terms of trends that we're seeing on the WAN optimization side, we're seeing a much greater awareness in the world around the limitations of adding bandwidth to solving replication and data center to data center problems. It's become quite clear that you can add bandwidth and not actually get much of an increase from a replication performance perspective, and that optimizations from TCP optimization to deduplication and compression are really critical if you're looking to get a high-performance replication.
One of the things that we're seeing from a web application development standpoint is that a lot of the practices to make a well-performing web page are exactly the opposite of what you need to have a rapidly moving development organization that's building web pages. And one of the most effective ways to deal with that is to put some product between the actual servers that are written by the developers and the ones that are accessed by the customers, and that's one of the places where F5 plays.
Absolutely. So what are the other places that we play from an F5 perspective? What are the specific products that we have to help to alleviate some of these challenges that you're talking about?
Within our local traffic manager, we have core acceleration features as RAM caching, compression, and rate shaping, which are included with every LTM. That does a good job at looking at server offload and optimizing your back-end infrastructure. Add on top of that Web Accelerator, which does web performance optimization, improves the end-user experience, really focuses on the improved page load time that Saxon was mentioning. Then if you have non-web-based applications, you have data replication concerns, needs to move large amount of traffic from one data center to another, our WAN optimization manager would come into play there.
Very cool. So we did a poll, and you can see, well, you guys can't see the results, but over 50% of the people who are on the call use compression, and 40% use Web Accelerator. So from a compression standpoint, is there anything that you guys are seeing as kind of trends that you think that are going to happen in the next, couple of years? Anything that you can, give insight to, or?
Well, I think one of the trends we're seeing on the compression front is that for a large sort of period of the history of web-based applications, compression had been primarily limited to text-based content. HTML, in fact, originally JavaScript and CSS were somewhat dangerous to try and compress due to browser bugs. We've kind of exited that era. Now most of it is really all the text-based files are being compressed with HTTP compression. And what we're starting to see now is actually compression of other objects that are being delivered through other types of compression routines. So image optimization is definitely a hot area. And then, in sort of, different industries, you also see talking about different video codecs and things like that. So most of the compression work we see on the website has moved, off of sort of the base technology, which is still actually an evolving space in the sense that new hardware comes out that allows us to run deflate that much faster, so we can keep up with the largest sites on the web. But from a sort of totally new technology perspective, we're seeing compression enter different aspects of web-based applications.
Very cool. And so Web Accelerator is, something 35% of our audience is using. Any thoughts about insight that we can give them around that topic?
Sure. Earlier this month, we just announced our 11.2 release for Web Accelerator. It should be available on the web early June, looks like. We've taken on some of the image optimization components, resizing files to make them smaller. We're seeing anywhere between 20 and 40% reduction in images with the image optimization. Yeah, images make up about 60% of a web page right now, and when you're dealing with a mobile device,
yeah, absolutely,
it really is a challenge to deliver all of the images in such a high quality.
Absolutely. And which release is that?
This is the 11.2 release.
Okay, which was just released less than a month ago, right?
The announcement was made.
Okay.
It will be available on the web in June.
Very cool.
So very soon.
Yeah. So we have our first question from Bill. Make this a little bigger. What is the difference between the 10x and 11x acceleration mechanism? Which is kind of what we were talking about a little bit with this, with the new release. But from a 10x to 11x standpoint, what are the gains that they receive from an acceleration standpoint?
Sure. On the Web Accelerator side, between 10 and 11, a great deal of work has gone into improving the throughput and request per second that Web Accelerator can manage. So it's a much more high performance system. We've switched the parsing mechanism from a run to completion to a streaming method to get better performance. We want the content delivered as quickly as possible. So we're looking at ways to tune the internal mechanisms and improve the acceleration internally in 11.0. When we got to 11.2, we added the image optimization. We've added content reordering.
Okay,
so
what is that?
In a web page, you want to not look at a blank white screen.
Right.
You want to see the content as quickly as possible. A lot of what's needed to format a page is within the style sheets.
Okay.
Many times the style sheets are located in the middle of the page, at the bottom of a page.
Yeah.
We'll move those files to the top of the page so
Okay.
that it can render as quickly as possible. JavaScript, on the other hand, is generally listed at the top of a page, but can block the downloading of other resources.
Okay.
And so JavaScript is now the option to be moved down to the bottom of the page so that you're not changing, blocking any other resources from downloading.
Great.
This is a mechanism that doesn't change the overall page load time. What it does is it changes the user's experience and perception as to how long it's taking content to download.
So you guys built those products, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so when you were in those development phases, what was the most important thing as we were, migrating from a 10x to 11x experience for customers?
The most important thing. Well, I mean, there's a large number of considerations. Making sure that the products we deliver are going to work reliably and be safe. So when you have an optimization, you're actually able to apply this in the real world without breaking pages or some other negative effect. Making sure that the technology is scalable, that's a critical one. If it puts so much load on the system that no one can use it, it doesn't really matter that we actually developed the technology, and that it's actually usable and easy to configure. And there's actually a huge number of considerations we have, some of which we can't take any shortcuts on, like stability and those kinds of things. But beyond that, we're really making sure that these optimizations actually do provide benefit, verifying that they work with the applications, and sometimes even going back and reviewing the policies that we have for various applications that we ship with the system, and making sure that those policies are up to date, include the optimizations that they should have, and making any changes that need to be made to reflect any of our technology changes or any changes in the application or the environments they're deployed in.
Right. We don't want any surprises as people deploy it and move from 10x to 11x.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the next question from Steve, and that is around pipelining using streaming profiles. He wants to know suggestions, and there's a big push for pipelining in his work. So any thoughts about that?
Well, one of the technologies that sort of competes with pipelining and it accomplishes a lot of the same goals is Speedy, and you've seen that F5's already announced that we will in 11.2 have support for Speedy as
early
access, and that'll be productized in actually 11.3. As far as pipelining. It is still one of the things on our roadmap, and we haven't done anything specifically for that at this time. I don't know if there's anything else that we need to add to that.
No, yeah, it's an area that we're looking at and trying to determine, what browsers can support it and what's the best way to implement. Anytime we implement a new acceleration feature, we do want to make sure that we're not going to break things and it is going to work for the most users and provide the most benefit. So it's weighing all the pros and cons.
Now, for video streaming, if you currently use Web Accelerator, what you'll get from video streaming is that you will get the benefit of the caching, you'll get the benefit of the longer lifetime. There's nothing we're doing special about video at this time, but you will get the benefit of caching, and so therefore it will alleviate your back-end pressure because the big IP will be able to serve that content directly.
Absolutely. So Bill had a question just about the way that the panel is working, and so Bill, hopefully you've figured out that you can open the live streaming into a bigger window and be able to see that a little bit better. So I think there's some chat about that on the chat window. But anyway. Just hopefully you figured that out. And the next one is about new web optimizations in 11.2, which we talked about a little bit. Is there anything other than that we've already talked about from 11.2 perspective?
The four main pieces that we launched in 11.2 is the Speedy Gateway, image optimization, content reordering, and the ability to parse style sheets to perform IBR. IBR is our intelligent browser referencing feature, which will add a version to static content and set long future expirations on them, so the browser doesn't have to come in and re-request them on the second or third visit.
Gotcha.
If the object hasn't changed. Previously, we were only parsing HTML. With the 11.2 release, we're also parsing styles.
Okay. Anything else, guys? Anything to add there?
For the web optimizations, I think that pretty much covers the changes in 11.2. There are some TCP optimization changes that we are making from the release to release, and lately we've been looking a little bit more on mobile performance and delivery across wireless networks, but there's nothing I can call out specifically. These are just sort of, under the hood kind of changes that we make just to get the best performance possible.
Yeah, so let us know if there's specific things you want us to drill down on more, and we'll be happy to take those questions as well. The next question is from Barry. He wants to migrate off of WAN Jets. He wants to know what the replacement is. He has EMC data. Well, you guys can read the question.
Yeah, it looks like he has a T3 link between two sites using SRDF to replicate data across those links, and he currently has WAN Jet deployed. That should be a fairly straightforward change to move off of WAN Jet to the WAN Optimization Manager. And so it would really be a matter of deploying WAM and then pulling the WAN Jets out of the network. I don't know any of the details about this network, but this looks like it should be pretty straightforward, and it'd be great if Barry could follow up with us or his F5 contact. I'm sure we can arrange the migration.
Okay, so the next question is from Matt. So he says he doesn't trust the developers that cache control headers to cache control headers properly, and would like you to use HTTP profiles or iRules to replace the cache control header on certain types of files. How would you recommend that he proceed?
So this is a very common request that people make, and it's why in 11x, the Web Accelerator has totally reworked the way we treat the cache control headers. You have total control over which headers come from the origin web server that we will support, and total control over what headers we're going to write to the client. So it gives you everything. You don't need an HTTP profile. You don't need an iRule. You can do it with iRules, but you can also, if you're using Web Accelerator, we can replace all of those headers, and we can do it, at wire speed. So it's really quite good.
Yeah, I'd say that's absolutely the right approach in this case. Part of the reason is you want to make sure that you manage all of your configuration changes also together as part of an application. You want to make sure that you can back those up, version them potentially, all kinds of other ways of managing that. And it's just a lot easier to manage the configuration across an application, especially these types of changes, cache control headers and the like, inside of the web acceleration product, inside of WAM, instead of it as a bunch of iRules or profiles or things like that. It'll just be so much easier to manage. And as you mentioned, the ability to control what we're going to do, separate from what we will tell clients, is absolutely critical to get the correct behavior.
Now, one aspect of this question is that you want it on specific file types. Well, that's also supported in Web Accelerator. You can match our actions on paths or on file types, and you have a lot of flexibility there, so you can get exactly the tuning that you need.
Mm-hmm. There is one other thing about the file types. I think that a lot of people kind of miss this about file types. File types aren't just extensions. Very often you can't see the type of a file inside of a request. So for instance, if you look at SharePoint as an application, very often file download requests all look pretty much the same. They might look like an ASPX request. And it's only until you've received the response and a content disposition header that you actually know what the content type is. And so trying to build all the cache control rules from a request matching perspective, at least for modern web apps, is pretty much doomed to fail, because you don't have enough information to perform the classification in many cases until the responses actually come back. And this is something that WAM is absolutely designed to do. And if you look at some of our policies and the way we match content types, you can see that we leverage this capability to get the correct lifetime headers set for different types of content.
Is that a pretty common scenario for people to be using?
It is. It's one of the last things that developers usually pay attention to, which is what are the cache control headers and some of the other headers that they're going to produce.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the other common scenarios that you guys are seeing?
Well, one of the things that we see most often, Dawn mentioned that the CSS headers may appear in the middle of the content. One of the ways that happens is you've divided up your development organization, and so that the person who's responsible for that part of the page wrote it at the top, but that's halfway down the page.
Right.
and that's a common thing to happen, and that's why that's in place.
Yeah, I would add to that. The other main thing that we're seeing today is just organizations don't have the time to invest in best practices for web performance optimizations, as well as the whole host of features that they want to build to make the application richer and more usable.
Absolutely.
And it sacrifices, and unfortunately, in many instances, performance ends up getting sacrificed over the features. People say, okay, people want this feature, and they'll wait 3 more seconds for a page to load, and they really won't.
Yeah.
I mean, people are really impatient.
Well, I would think that that's pretty relevant too for older websites, that you don't have to go back and rewrite and things like that. You can actually optimize it so that it's all automated and works better. And provides the user a better experience.
Yeah, that's a great point. Not only are you dealing with the applications that you have control over, but it's the third-party applications that are critical for a business that you can't go in and rewrite the code because Oracle and Microsoft don't give you access to the source code to go and rewrite things.
I don't know why. Yeah. That's a good point. So the next question is from Bill, and he wants to know whether these features are part of Virtual Edition as well. So how does that work? How does Virtual Edition work from an acceleration standpoint?
As of the 11.1 release, Web Accelerator is available on a Virtual Edition. It's available in the Lab Edition. You can get it as a standalone, or you can get it as an add-on module.
Very cool.
Yeah, so and that means that at that point, all the acceleration technologies we have are available on the Virtual Edition.
Okay. Yep.
Bill says good deal. He's very happy to hear that.
You do want to look at the release notes associated with that. There's a couple of things that you'll have to do there to make sure that that works okay, and if you don't, your performance won't be quite what you expect.
Okay. So there's a question about Web Accelerator and WAN optimization. We can't really talk a lot about from a roadmap perspective because, this is a public chat. But can you guys give an idea of, what's important that you see from an industry perspective that you think should be addressed or are possibilities?
Yeah, from a high-level trends, and if anybody's interested in, detailed roadmap, I'm happy to set up those calls. Just contact, an account manager, and we can get into all the details. But from a high-level trends perspective, the areas that we're researching right now are in mobile.
Okay.
A huge increase in the devices out there, people that are accessing applications from the mobile, or a mobile is the only device that they're using to access.
And one of the things we're seeing for mobile devices is that the optimizations that are best for one device aren't necessarily the same as the other. And even the optimizations that are best for the same device change whether they're using Wi-Fi or 3G. And so we're aware of that, and that is one of the things that we're paying close attention to.
Outside of mobile, HTML5.
Yeah. Looking
at what's happening with that, what are the ways that we can accelerate HTML5 applications? Can we rewrite an application into HTML5 easily?
Interesting, yeah.
That's another area. People have been asking us previously about Speedy and WebSockets.
Yeah.
We're clearly already announced the Speedy component, but, still investigating, WebSockets and the new and emerging technologies along those lines.
The other thing that we're paying attention to is the amount of streaming video content on the web is increasing alarmingly. And this is an issue for some of our customers, and so that's one of the other things that we're taking a look at.
Yeah, when you look at that charting of, how much streaming media actually happens on the web and on phones and, just the whole gamut, it's just crazy. Crazy. So we have another question about pipelining. We mentioned pipelining is not supported now. Does that mean if the client is sending pipeline request, will some be dropped?
We will not As long as the OWS and the client both support pipelining, we will allow it through. We just don't do anything special for it.
Okay.
Right. And most clients don't do pipelining normally.
Right.
And legacy servers, older servers, will tend to do bad things if you just start sending them pipelined requests as well.
Okay. So the next question is on RAM cache. Can you talk a little bit about where, what the solutions are or what we do from a RAM cache perspective?
RAM cache is primarily designed to provide server offload for static resources, images and style sheets and JavaScript files that all users are accessing. There's no need to have those delivered from the web servers. The web servers should be focused on the higher value transactions. And RAM cache will just serve all of those objects to everybody. If the object has to be served differently to different users, if there's one JavaScript version for IE6 and a different JavaScript version for Firefox, RAM cache generally has more challenges handling that kind of a variation in a same file request just based on a user agent string. In that case, you'd start looking at Web Accelerator to do that server offload, static resource caching.
And I think one of the key things that you kind of hit on in sort of the beginning was that RAM cache is focused on offloading the web tier. So if you're looking at trying to improve page load performance, while RAM cache can offload your web tier, that's probably not the first place to look in terms of trying to improve end user experience. And instead, WAM would be a better place to start in terms of technologies to look at for improving how long it takes for a page to be delivered and rendered on a browser.
Okay, hold on, let me put the other question up on our board here. Bill asked, generally speaking, how many of these features are available out of the box just by clicking to enable versus features that require custom applications or specific configurations?
We come with a huge number of predefined application acceleration policies. There's 3 generic policies which have all of the settings already configured and enabled in a safe way that'll work with the majority of applications. So our intelligent browser referencing is enabled, caching of static objects is enabled. When you get into, image optimization is enabled with some very safe settings. When you get into some of the more advanced features, the content reordering, that requires application-specific knowledge and configuration. We don't want to move a style sheet to the top of the page if it needs to be in a certain place. We don't want to move a JavaScript if that's going to change the way that the application behaves. So functionality that could potentially break an application requires additional configuration steps.
Okay.
So our multi-connect feature, which is a domain sharding functionality, requires additional steps. Content reordering requires additional steps. And I believe today those are the only 2 features that require additional user interaction.
Right.
Down the road, we'll have additional features that require a slight amount of user configuration.
And to be clear, the multi-connect configuration that's needed is, since we're doing domain sharding, they have to be domains that are routable for the client, and we can't tell what those are automatically. So it's not a big configuration step for multi-connect. For reordering, it is a bit more involved because someone needs to determine what's safe to move and what's not.
So when you talk about it needs configuration, what is typical for how long that actually takes? What's the investment? Does it just vary so much that you can't say, or is there some sort of?
It varies based on the knowledge of the application.
Okay.
If you know the application and exactly how it works, it's going to be very easy for you to go in and say, these are the 4 style sheets that can be moved, these 2 cannot. If you don't know the application, it's a lot of trial and error.
Okay.
So
That makes sense.
Yeah, so if you don't know the application, best advice I can give is find somebody that does and get their help. in getting this configured.
And that's for those settings that require the additional configuration.
Right.
For all the ones that we have, the policies that we ship with the device, those ones are all very simple to apply. So those don't really require much knowledge of the application. We've already done a lot of that work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And there's some information, I believe, on Dep Central about, what the features are and how to use them as well. So, so that might be useful to people as well.
Yeah. I want to skip ahead a bit to Steve's question, because this is just tying into what we were saying. We mentioned the 3 generic policies. They're called generic complete, generic fundamental, and generic enhanced. And the difference between them is the degree of acceleration that you're trying to get out of Web Accelerator.
Mm-hmm. For example, the generic complete policy, we have enabled image optimization for JPEGs and PNGs. Any of the other generic policies, image optimization is not enabled. The optimizations are very safe, very conservative settings. You can go in and go much more aggressive. The generic complete will also add the parsing of style sheets for IBR. The generic fundamental does not do IBR in style sheets.
Okay.
So those are some of the areas where the features change from policy to policy as you move up the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Let's see. So back to Speedy. What are the abilities that we support? Prioritization, server push. Can we give a little bit more detail on that?
We do support prioritization. What we're basically doing is we're terminating Speedy for servers that don't support Speedy yet. Clearly, if the server supports Speedy and the client supports Speedy, then the big IP becomes a pass-through. The advantage to terminating it is that we can also do page modification if we're also terminating the Speedy connection, which is a secure connection, and able to actually see the content as it goes by. We don't yet do server push, but we do prioritization and I don't have
header
a list
compression
of
and
header
multiplexing.
compression and
That's right.
I thought that was just part of the protocol.
It is.
Awesome. So Steve had a follow-up. He said, so those policies are not LTM specific, rather Web Accelerator.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And the next question is about domain sharding. Multi-connect considered bad practice for mobile today?
Domain sharding is...
What is it?
Domain sharding is taking the HTML resources, your images and JavaScript, and spreading them over multiple domains to trick the browser into opening more connections to download the content. Browsers today open between 2 to 6 connections, and they'll only download those many objects in parallel. But with domain sharding, you can say, I'm splitting the domains. This is retrieved on. So instead of getting 6 objects, you're getting 12 objects simultaneously. It was a lot more popular when browsers were only doing 2 connections at a time. Now that more browsers have gone to 6 connections, it's losing some popularity. Definitely not recommended with Speedy. Domain sharding and Speedy are not compatible.
They're not friends.
They're not friends, no.
Yeah, and in fact, domain sharding and anything SSL related is actually not recommended.
Right.
If you actually watch what happens with browsers, very often applications that use a large number of domains, you'll notice the browser closing connections to other domains before opening connections to new domains, and that's worse than when you don't shard.
Mm-hmm. And on the mobile front, domain sharding, you're dealing with high latency links, low bandwidth, and you're basically trying to shove a lot more data through a really tiny pipe, and you end up with packet loss. So it isn't that great for mobile devices as well. It brings a point where 3-4 years ago, this was the hot topic, and this was the way to optimize.
Really? Okay.
So it's really interesting to see how acceleration technologies come into favor and out of favor based on how people are accessing and how the web's evolving.
Absolutely. And browsers, I would think, as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Matt. He says, we implemented the default compression profiles and an improved performance, but I'm not sure that's best for our applications. What do you know as far as tuning the HTTP compression files, such as HTTP WAN optimization compression? Also, how do you know what to tune?
Well, and that's so for people who aren't aware with that section in a big IP, that's actually one of the most complicated and sort of, difficult to understand sections simply because it's a reference directly to how Deflate actually operates. So some things to keep in mind when tuning your HTTP profiles, make sure that you pick compression levels that will run on the correct processor. And by that I mean, if you use too much compression, if you set the compression level too high, you can move off of hardware accelerated compression and into a software compression mode. This may actually be to your benefit if you're trying to reduce the amount of data sent across the wide area network, but it does mean that the throughput for the device will suffer because you won't be getting hardware acceleration. So that's one of the considerations. Otherwise, you're looking at trade-offs between memory usage, pretty much, and the amount of compression you're going to get. Generally speaking, though, in terms of where I spend my time configuring a big IP to optimize an application's performance, that's actually not the section where I spend most of my time. Instead, I spend more time on layer 7 optimizations with WAM and sections like that, or in TCP optimization, because I usually can find I can get more gain out of those compared to spending time in the compression profile settings.
So from a baselining perspective, how do people measure where they are, and then after turning on these features, after tuning things, how do they know the difference? What do you suggest in trying to figure out how it has increased or how it has optimized?
So how should they measure the performance of their application?
Exactly. Thank you.
So the first thing is that how you measure performance really depends on the application and how it's going to be used and what aspect of performance you're actually looking at. Performance, as for a web-based application, is very different than performance for a replication process or a vMotion. So the first thing is to really define what aspect of the performance it is that you want to improve. Is it page load time that you're really concerned about, or is it really just savings of bandwidth across the wide area network that's your primary concern, because it's a cost-saving activity primarily. So first understand really exactly what are the metrics that will determine success. And then look at tools or services you can use to measure those changes as you're performing your tuning and your optimization and rolling out your optimized solution. And then ideally also have something that you can use to monitor this over time, if you can afford it. So if you can afford a service that does performance measurement, that would be probably a pretty good investment as well. And then also be familiar with the tools available on a big IP as well. We've got a large number of statistics we collect. There's a dashboard that you can also use for viewing the performance of various different applications. So get familiar with the statistics related to that application and monitor those, and I think that would be probably a pretty good start.
Awesome. And there's a follow-up on that too, asking if there's guides or best practices for tuning compressions 17 profiles or TCP tuning. Hold on.
Oh, layer 7 profiles, or TCP.
Yeah.
So TCP profile tuning is also another one of those sections that is fairly involved. I can give some general advice for at least how I go about TCP profile tuning. Specifically for wide area network performance, generally I start actually with the WAM TCP WAN optimized profile after running the WAN Optimization Manager's Quick Start, and there's a reason for this. If you run the Quick Start, it will configure that profile with buffer settings that are sized based off of the platform that you're on. And that's a pretty valuable piece of knowledge to actually have when configuring your TCP profile. This is not to say that you have to use a WAN Optimization Manager. It's just by going through that Quick Start process, a script will get run that will detect those settings and configure those profiles. Once those values have been entered, then you have a profile you can use as a base. And the next setting I usually look at are the ignore loss rate and the ignore loss burst settings. And both of those settings are about handling packet loss across a wide area network. And they allow you to make the stack a little more aggressive over networks that have some background packet loss. And that could be like a satellite link or a wireless network. And those settings there can have a pretty substantial impact on the delivery performance of your application.
Awesome. And so the next comment is, I saw application performance monitoring in an announcement. How is this achieved?
The application performance component is achieved through our analytics module. It's available with every LTM. It provides statistics on URLs that have been requested, what geographies they're being requested from, the number of requests for each of them. You can also use the navigation timing specification to capture page load times. The navigation timing specification is available in IE9 and in Chrome, and Firefox introduced it in one of their recent releases. So what the navigation timing specification does is it'll actually report back how long it took a page for an end user
Very cool.
to load. So you're able to see how your application is performing for your real end users.
Absolutely.
Synthetic testing is great to understand network availability and general performance trends. But what's most important is that last mile to the actual end user.
Absolutely.
Understanding, how long is it taking on a specific browser because they've got 20 different windows open and you've got limited processor power on the system.
I am one of those users with the
We
20
all.
million windows open. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else to add, guys? Nope. Okay. Another question from Bill. Are there new or different metrics, statistics, and graphs available through WA that aren't available through LTM v11x?
So one thing to remember about statistics is that in addition to graphs, the Big IP also maintains metrics through stats tables. The best way to get to those is from the shell, where you can just run TM control and it'll list out all of those stats. Both RAM cache and Web Accelerator are both capable of terminating the SSL connection. So it will have metrics on the number of bytes that were served from cache and things like that that aren't base LTM metrics that just wouldn't apply to base LTM. So in both of those cases you can get additional metrics about cache performance and cache hits and things like that. In addition, we have some metrics that will help indicate which types of acceleration we did, but Web Accelerator alone doesn't tell you the end user performance. For that, you need to use the tools that Dawn was just referring to.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about WAM and Warmlight. What are the difference between the two, and how do people know which one they're using or what's best for them?
Okay. The difference between WAM and Warmlight has to do with additional acceleration technologies that are available for optimization across the WAN. So with Warmlight, you get the iSessions optimization technology, which allows optimization between two different big IPs that are deployed in different networks. This is sort of a symmetric WAN optimization topology. And then across that connection, you can have SSL encryption, TCP optimization, selective adaptive compression. So that's what you get with the light. With full WAM, you also get deduplication, and then you also get CIFS acceleration and MAPI acceleration. And so from a configuration standpoint, the two are nearly identical. And the reason for doing that is because we wanted to make sure that someone could easily transition from a light configuration to a full configuration. So all of the concepts of the configuration from a routing and virtual perspective is really identical. The difference is that with the full module, the critical thing that you gain is deduplication, but then also CIFS acceleration, which if you're doing any Windows file sharing or using any backup applications that use CIFS as the underlying transport, you get CIFS acceleration, which is really actually critical because of the chatty nature of CIFS. as well as MAPI.
Very cool. And hold on. We have a question from Alan. And there we go. With Enterprise Manager reporting change. Hold on, let me actually just put it up here. I've been trying to copy it and read it at the same time. Will Enterprise Manager reporting change with V11X, and will there be any additional WA reporting capabilities?
With the 11.2 release, Enterprise Manager will be able to centralize the analytics that I was mentioning earlier. So with 11.0 and 11.1, the analytics are only available on a per box basis. With 11.2, we have centralized analytics. So all of the analytics from any system can be aggregated onto Enterprise Manager. In terms of additional WA reporting, there is nothing different between 10 and 11 in terms of additional reporting capabilities for Web Accelerator, with the exception of the dashboard. The dashboard was introduced in 11.0 for Web Accelerator.
Any other thoughts, guys? Good. So for people who are just getting started from an acceleration standpoint, what do you suggest? Where do you suggest that they start?
Well, one of the places to start is by the page test tools that are available on the web. And that'll sort of indicate what are some of the possible issues for your application. Now, that does need to be, as one of the other comments indicated earlier, that will recommend domain sharding. Domain sharding doesn't actually always work. And so so that alone doesn't give you a lot, but it will tell you some things that will help you start tuning things. If you have a big IP, then the other thing that you can start with is start running some of the accelerations and testing it to see what happens. In addition to the 3 profiles we've already mentioned, there is also Web Accelerator profiles for optimizing Exchange, for example, if you're running Exchange. And there's a long list of about 20 profiles for specific applications. And so if those are the applications you want to accelerate, those are safe to just turn on for your application. And then the next part is it ties into the tuning, but in this case it's tuning of the accelerator profiles and policies. And the best way to do that is with an understanding of your application. Without that, it's a lot of trial and testing just to make sure that you didn't accidentally break something.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I always stress with customers and the field and everybody that even though we have these predefined acceleration policies, you need to test in a lab or single user testing before deploying to make sure that it's not going to break your application. SharePoint is a great example of an application where people have built so many widgets and add-on modules that can be added on top of it, that there could be something in a specific module that's been added on that won't work with the policies that we've defined. So you can't stress enough how important it is to test when doing acceleration and start with the base policies and then go and add features and try some of the more advanced things. If you add all of the advanced things, you're then having to peel back the onion and figuring out, okay, well, what broke first? Change one thing at a time, test, and then move on to the next.
One of the other things to do if you're deploying it for your own application that your own development team has developed is get in touch with the developers and the architects for that solution, because typically they'll know what would actually work and what would help, and so they can frequently point you at, we want this, this, and this, and frequently they'll actually be helpful because it'll be like, oh, well, now we don't have to do that anymore, so now we can work on the features you're asking for.
So generally they'll know what areas of the product or code maybe not as optimized as it could be.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so you talked about the base profiles and and all of the different ones we have for different applications. Where do people get those?
They're shipped with Web Accelerator
Okay.
by default. With every release, we'll add a new update. So
Okay.
when SharePoint 2010 came out, that was updated. We have a Maximo policy that's just coming out with the new release. That'll be in 11.2. Between releases, if we have a new application policy, we will post that onto Dev Central.
Okay, and so for the updates as well, they can get those on Dev Central as well?
Correct.
Awesome. Awesome. Do we have any kind of information about what profiles people are using the most, what products people are using the most from a optimization standpoint? If you're talking about kind of those big apps like SharePoint and things like that, what are people using the most?
I think SharePoint is definitely one of our number one, and then the number two policy that we see being used the most is our generic policies.
Okay.
So people that have done their own or customized something enough that they've gone to a generic policy. We've also seen instances where they're using a generic policy, but it actually is for a SharePoint application because the person that was configuring wasn't aware that it was SharePoint. They knew it, that, this is just the company portal.
Yeah.
And didn't know what the software underlying it was. It's like, oh, if you switch to this policy, this may fix things and have things run a little bit faster for you.
Absolutely. So we are about at the end of our time. So any other best practices, any thoughts we can leave with our users and viewers?
One last thing, I'll stress again the testing. And I sound like a broken record, but I always say it. And the second thing is to talk with your counterparts. If you're an application developer, talk with the networking team. If you're on the networking team, talk with the application developers. To do optimization of an application, it requires both network and application. It's not a one or the other. You need to have both, and you need to be in communication to make sure that everything's running efficiently and smoothly.
That absolutely makes sense.
One of the things that I sort of mentioned this and hinted towards this before, but the closer we can get to working with the developers and improving your application, the happier I think all of us will be, because that way we can make sure that we're making the features that complement what the developers actually need, and that's really where we want to go.
I think one of the nice things about acceleration technologies is that generally the worse the application seems to be performing, the more likely you will get incredible benefit by deploying them. If an application is already fast, it's probably doing a lot of things right, and the network is probably configured pretty well, and the users are probably pretty close to it. The reason applications are slow is they have a number of challenges. These can be network challenges, application design challenges, protocol challenges. And each one of these challenges is an opportunity. And our technologies that we build are designed to attack or engage these opportunities and improve application performance. So if you have an application that's slow, that's really just an opportunity.
That's a good point. So there's one question that came in too about the profiles that we mentioned. Are they usable across modules or Web Accelerator specific?
Web Accelerator has a set of profiles for applications. ASM, our application security module, has another set of profiles. Each product has its own policy and profile based on what configurations need to be made.
Right, and I'd say that iApps is sort of a technology that runs across all of those and allows you to, fairly easily configure a virtual server for an application with the correct policies for any number of different F5 products applied at the same time for that application. So if you're looking for sort of a policy that sort of spanned, security and acceleration and those kinds of things, it would really be sort of iApp as a configuration coordinating kind of system.
And once you have those policies, as you can put the other modules on the same virtual server that's using Web Accelerator, but the policies themselves are Web Accelerator specific. You can just also add any other modules you need to in that same process chain.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. We're gonna see if anybody has any last questions, but we are about done with time. So, any last parting words, guys? No.
No.
We good? We good? Dawn, you had something a video that just got put out, right?
Oh yeah, yesterday we posted on Dev Central a image optimization demo. So it goes through the new feature in 11.2 showing how to optimize images using National Geographic as a sample website.
Oh, National Geographic. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So everybody is saying thanks, and this was very helpful. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Saxon, Shawn, Dawn. It's been wonderful having you here, and thank you for answering questions.
My pleasure.
Pleasure.
Take care.